I love A Hat in Time, and today you will learn why. However, this won't be all rainbows and unicorns, as there are problems with this game that needs to be addressed. But we'll get into that much later. For now, let me share with you the platforming adventure that captured my heart forever and became an instant favorite. And there are spoilers everywhere, so watch at your own risk. After Yooka took a big old dump in our faces, it was looking rather grim for the kickstarted revival of 3D platformers. We realized how much we had grown up since the days of the N64, and that nostalgia simply wasn't enough to quench our thirst. But Gears for Breakfast, see, they never cared what we thought. They said amongst themselves, "Listen guys, we all grew up with and loved these games, so let's make something 10 times better." And that's exactly what they did. A Hat in Time is an absolute triumph. Everyone who's had the honor of playing it already knows this, and those who don't think so, well, I guess you don't like it, I don't know. The first ingredient in this brilliant recipe is this little girl right here. Hat Kid is the fucking MVP of video game characters. Sonic the Hedgehog is witty, rebellious, and lives in a high, but then you start running around and immediately feel like killing yourself. Mario is all or and then you just want to turn around and jump, but fuck. Link is Hat Kid's mere presence on screen cures illnesses, feeds the homeless, end wars, and makes you feel just a usual amount of empty. Unlike the silent protagonist that puts the player in their shoes, these shoes are already occupied, baby. And yet somehow, without uttering more than a couple of words, she has more personality than characters with 10 hours of dialogue. She gives this game such a strong sense of identity right off the bat, and I could watch her idle animations for days. Now, explaining just what makes Hat Kid control so perfectly is like explaining a taste or smell to someone who hasn't experienced it yet. But regardless, I'll give it a go. I have never, in any platformer, felt so confident in my platforming abilities as I have in this one. You don't have to feel that pit in your stomach as you're about to jump from a ledge, or having to stop and perfectly align your rotation so that you'll jump in the right direction. You can double jump, dash, cancel the dash with another jump, climb up ledges, run up walls, and or jump from them. This core set of movement options beautifully flows together, and as a result, leaves the player with many opportunities as well as chances to recover from mistakes. Some might say this takes the challenge away from a platformer, but I say the challenge shouldn't necessarily be the platforming itself. Just look at the 3D Marios. In Sunshine you got Flood, that lets you hover in the air. Galaxy you got the Spin, and Odyssey has Cappy, all of which are movesets primarily made for recovery usages. Because guess what? 64's lack of aerial control turned out to be way too punishing. And while most people blames the poor camera, I say no matter how good the camera control is, platforming in 3D space is extremely tedious without a secondary action mid-air. What we end up with is an enjoyable, lively, and cute as heck protagonist that controls tremendously well. I mean, walking around the hub is a blast due to the polish and game feel. What do you think that says about running around the actual levels? Well, let's find out. All the chapters are unique, fun experiences, each in their own right. Mafia Town takes the Sunshine approach and gives you a giant area to explore and complete specific tasks in, and will change a little depending on the act you're currently playing. And every act plays into the next, telling a story of you meeting with Mustache Girl and taking down the Mafia boss. Battle of the Birds takes the Galaxy approach and gives you multiple linear areas with less exploration and more focused tasks. This chapter tells a story of two rival birds trying to make the best movie and win the annual Bird Movie Award, in which the outcome is determined by your results in the acts. Subcon Forest is set in a giant spooky area where every act is a contract that you have to fulfill in order to get back your soul and become free. And Alpine Skyline is a free roam, Zelda-like adventure where you traverse islands in the sky by ziplining around. And the story, I don't know, something about giant ox people. And lastly, the final chapter, which wraps everything up in a Bowser's Castle type act. So the keyword to summarize the chapters is variety. There is always something new to shape things up. Ideas are floating around at every corner, and for the most part isn't completely discarded either. I mean, in one act you're sneaking around a movie studio, avoiding lights and shit, and then whoop, next act you're solving a freaking murder mystery on a train. You also have time rifts for more platforming focused stages, but suddenly you're inside a mansion and it's not Luigi's! And the world itself is such a whimsical, wonderful place. Much like moving around as Hat Kid is enjoyable, so is inhabiting these locations and talking to the NPCs in them. And listening to the soundtrack! I mean, what can I really say? Anyone who ever talks about music will either say, "It's amazing," or "It fucking sucks." So instead of talking about how good it is, how perfect it is, how magnificent and how life-enhancing it is, how it resurrects the dead, how good it is, I will instead mention my favorite part of the sound design as a whole, and that is theming. You have a soundtrack, and then you go underwater and the music gets muffled. You go to the beach and different instruments play. You have a different version playing at night. Inside the casino. When the town is covered in lava. After the mafia boss is defeated. You're running around, platforming in the rift, listening to this soothing tune. And then you hop on your scooter. Holy flip! And don't even get me started on Subcon Forest, you guys. We would be here all of 5 minutes, and I don't have that kind of time. Point being, theming is awesome, and the soundtrack is brimming with it. And it goes without saying that the soundtrack itself is a masterpiece. The characters just kicks an immense amount of ass. From the Mafia to the Birds, the Conductor, Snatcher, and even Mustache Girl brings a lot of laughs and goofs to the table. Not even once did I feel like skipping through any line of text. But on the other hand, I did get a little bit tired of some of the voices. Specifically Mustache Girl. But you know what? I would like to take this chance to defend the voice acting for just a second, because I've noticed that it's one of the few recurring criticisms of this game. So get this, you can disable voice lines even before you start playing. Problem solved. But seriously, why would you? Besides Mustache Girl, who overacts her role a bit, and the Conductor, who... Alright, the rest of the voices are great, so stop acting like Simon Cowell, you flippin' dinks.
But fear not, Cookie and Cat is here.
Except this fucking cat, seriously, this is the worst voice. But I'm skipping way ahead here, so let's get back on a positive track. The way HatKid interacts with the characters is what truly makes them shine. But even though I already gave a warning about spoilers, I can't bring myself to give the best examples. So you just have to take my word for it. It's beyond adorable. Combat certainly isn't a fleshed out aspect, but it never needed to be. You can whack enemies with your umbrella, jump on their heads, or do a homing attack. Most enemies are instantly killed, while others, like the Mafia, requires a little bit of struggle. They'll go into this Wario World red status, where they block your umbrella attacks, so you have to jump on them instead. There isn't a huge cast of enemies, but somehow more than Yooka-Laylee. Wow. Whatever, the combat and enemies are just fine, but takes a complete backseat to the amazing boss battles! This was by far one of the most pleasant surprises. There is none of that hit me on the glowing weak spot bullshit, or do that thing 3 times. They actually feel like straight up battles, and the variety is off the chain. I cannot give enough praise to these bosses, but I'll stop talking about them before I lose complete track. Let's take a look at some hats. You start with the kid's hat, which shows you the direction of your objective. I like this hat because it gives people with low attention spans, or just casual fucking scrubs, a chance to find their way easily. Sprint hat lets you sprint, brewing hat lets you throw explosive potions, ice hat works like a ground pound, and time stop hats, it slows time, which is false advertisement at best. None of these hats are inherently interesting, but all works very well within their own context. My favorite one that I didn't mention is the Dweller's Mask, which when activated will materialize objects that you otherwise can't interact with. I think somewhere between the effects of using it and the platforming designed around it is what sets it apart from the rest. You also have the badges to customize your gameplay with passive effects. I'm sort of just skimming through this because I'm saving it for the other half of this video, so I'll just leave it with showing my favorite badge. Oh, the scooter! My favorite aspect of any game, besides the core gameplay of course, is customization, especially as unlockable features. So look no further than the roulette machine. After completing a time rift or spending 3 rift tokens, you enter a roulette to win random prizes, which includes skins for hats, color palettes, and remixes for some of the soundtracks. There is never a dull moment on the screen, as you can pimp yourself up wherever, whenever, and for any old reason. And the references are in full gear. But I mean, this whole game is a big ass reference altogether, so I guess that's a given. I just think it's a wonderful thing when developers can pay its respects, as well as borrow elements from its inspirations, without losing track of itself or being too reliant on them. I was planning on one last segment before jumping into rant mode, but after going over the script, I realized that it doesn't serve any point. It was supposed to be a rapid-fire showcase of my favorite moments, but there are just too many to list. But more importantly, I don't want to ruin it for the people who haven't had the chance to play it yet. But be that as it may, I must talk about the best function in the entire game. Blowing kisses and raspberries. Completely pointless, but honestly the best thing ever created. This video could literally just have been 20 minutes of this and it would have served the same purpose. Rant mode! There isn't any huge problems here, so it's kind of hard to dedicate whole segments for specific categories. So instead, we'll take it from the top and quickly make our way through and find some shit to nitpick along the way. After a silly opening cutscene, you land in Mafia Town and begin your first act. There is a simple tutorial that has you following Mustache Girl, teaching the player how to move around, rotate the camera, jump, double jump, and possibly dash. It's neat because no one is telling you to do anything, you're just a curious player following this mysterious person who keeps escaping from you. And since she's also a short girl character like yourself, seeing her jump an additional time will most likely make you think, maybe I can do that. Son of a bitch, I forgot I was doing a rant. When you finally catch up to her, she holds onto some rope that raises her up to a tower, gives some award-winning dialogue.
Looks like you've got a lot of cleaning up to do, huh?
Tells you to climb up to her, and uh-oh! This game pausing and camera showing you what's ahead thing is the single most dumbest thing in video game history. But seriously, it's not a big deal. I just wanted to make a little goof out of it. I'm not saying I expect people to see the difference between this and, say, what I complained about in my Yooka-Laylee video, but fuck it, I expect people to see the difference. There isn't anything to complain about regarding the first act, so let's move on. After completing the first act and officially activating the first chapter, 2 acts will be made available to you, the second and a third. Initially you're thinking, multiple choices, how neat, which is a notion I can totally get behind. It gives you the feeling that you're having a different experience than others, increases replay value, and sets a precedent for how chapters will play out. You also learn that some acts requires pawns or money to unlock, but in this case it's a ridiculously small amount, and the chances of you not having it is 1% at best. But it gives players the expectations of what to collect and save pawns for, which again is awesome. But this is where I'm starting to get confused. Mafia Town has a consistent storyline throughout its acts, so it doesn't make much sense to change the order. In Act 3, it's nighttime, and your objective is to get an hourglass from this scientist dude, and whoa, wait a second. I thought this was about accessing the cannon. Let's back up a bit. In Act 2, you save Mustache Girl from some mafia, become her friend, and then have her appear in your spaceship, where you go over the plan to take down Mafia HQ. But upon replaying, I noticed how the cannon was never even mentioned. In Act 4, you spawn at night, right where you first met the scientist last act, next to the cannon, which is now functioning. I just figured that he had something to do with it, but now this doesn't make any sense. Regardless, I think there are a couple of issues. I don't have any statistics to back this up, but I am willing to bet that a majority of players went for Act 3 instead of 2, because of a number of reasons. It's more tempting to skip ahead just because you can, and the fact that it requires a small fee to unlock makes it feel more interesting. I personally didn't, because I figured it was more convenient to do them in an order. But if you don't, then it's just weird how in 1 second it's night, then it's back to day and you're playing Donkey Kong, and then it's night again, just where you left off 2 acts ago. That being said, was there even a point to all this? You still have to beat these 2 acts in order to access the 4th, so I just find it a bit strange. Like I explained earlier, I get it, I just don't get it. And then, after beating the Mafia boss, you can access 2 more acts. 6 and 7? The fuck happened to 5? And why does 6 have to be unlocked with 100 pawns? I only got 44. So now, if I want to do it in order, I have to go back and grind? Mustache Girl even steals half of your pawns from you, so it's like they didn't want you to afford this act yet, and skip right to 7. I just don't understand. And then, after beating 6 and 7, Act 5 finally unlocks. But you won't be able to complete it yet. Just to jump way ahead and spoil the mystery, this act requires the Time Stopper hat. Otherwise you won't win this race, unless you are this guy, but I don't think this was ever intended. But why is this act that requires a hat you won't unlock until reaching almost the very end, number 5? and more importantly, cost less pawns than number 6. The more I think about this, the weirder it gets. Also, I don't like that it tells you that you're missing a key item and basically tells you, don't play this yet, come back later. Why can I even unlock it this early then? This won't happen a lot, but it gets extremely frustrating at one point, which we'll get to in a bit. I also have more to say about Mafia Town and Mustache Girl, but we'll go through the rest of the chapters first. The second chapter is unlocked after collecting 4 hourglasses, meaning that you can already skip ahead after beating the Mafia boss. Again, giving the player the choice between moving ahead with the story or sticking to Mafia Town to complete the remaining, at least possible, acts. If you did, you will have 6 hourglasses, and by beating the first act of chapter 2, you will be able to skip ahead to the third chapter. At this point, you will have several acts to choose from, which again is both positive and negative. Most players will probably feel like sticking to the second chapter, but after beating the first 3 acts, you are basically forced to switch over to chapter 3. For starters, you're hit with 2 widely different paywalls. I don't even know what's going on here, to be honest. But one of them requires a core item that you won't acquire until Act 2 of the next chapter. So it is impossible to complete Battle of the Birds before entering the subcon well. Why? There's no point in giving people the option to play in a different order if you disable the original one. Whatever, there are just 2 other nitpicks I would like to address with this chapter. When sneaking around, the light detection doesn't always seem to work, or maybe it's just too forgiving. Not a big deal, but it takes away the tension ever so slightly, if there ever was any. Act 5, the big parade, is a bit unclear in its objectives, and has a lot of time you spend wandering around aimlessly. The idea itself is fun, but there just isn't enough to do as you're waiting for the scripted events to happen. Chapter 3 has one major issue, and that is the way contracts are given. So you start off by being captured by Snatcher, who makes you do tasks for him. Midway through your first contract, he shows up and has you signing another one, this time having the choice between 2. At this point, you will have 2 acts to choose from. And in this chapter specifically, I don't mind, since there isn't much of a continuity anyway. However, after completing your 2 contract, you find yourself not knowing what to do next. What you're supposed to do is run into these traps that are placed at specific locations, but how would you know that? I did this by complete accident on my first playthrough, so therefore didn't think much of it. So if you end up like this, you have to go back to one of the earlier acts and activate the traps from there, and make sure you get both of them. Otherwise, you have to do it an additional time. This could easily have been fixed by Snatcher showing up automatically like he did when you murdered the fire spirits in the village. Come to think of it, you could possibly do Vanessa's Manor without picking up the contract for it. See, it's not awful or anything, just confusing. I'm so conflicted about what to think about this, because it didn't hinder my initial experience at all. I just wish certain things made more sense, that's all. But I can't even stay mad at this game for more than a second, so this is the worst rant I've ever made. Chapter 4 is perfect. Except it isn't. It would have been if it ended with a boss battle, but instead you just have to whack some plants. Because they are infecting the ox people or something. Alright, this last act is pretty dumb. Besides the epic soundtrack and setting, of course. It also feels very out of place compared to the rest. There is no major character introduced like the Mafia, Conductor, and Snatcher. And you don't even have to enter it in order to fight the last boss. So if you don't, you will probably ask yourself, who the fuck is this ox? So all you get out of it, besides some extra collectibles, is the Time Stopper hat, which you only need for 1 act. Which brings me to my next point. Backtracking. It's never required and it doesn't amount to much. For the 100% completion mark, going back to Mafia Town for the 5th act makes sense, I guess. But take a look at this. There are springboards meant for the ice hat and floating targets for the hookshots all over. So when the player unlocks the hat, they will obviously want to return to see what lies in store now that you can access more of the level. So what can you access to be exact? 3 yard balls, meant for creating hats, which I'll talk about real soon. Just trust me when I say that this is disappointing. Same goes for the hookshot. You get 2 Rift tokens out of it. I mean, Rift tokens are great and all, but I was kind of expecting something else. I think this just boils down to some missed opportunities. The Golden Ticket Act could have been designed around this, or the location of one of the rifts, a secret hourglass, lots of alternatives could have been done. Whatever happened to Mustache Girl? She's like the Skull Kid from Majora's Mask. She shows up in the beginning and doesn't become relevant until the end, which I guess is fine. I think every respective chapter should have their own stories and characters, which it does, and it works great, but just seeing a tiny hint of her progress or ramifications of her actions, like the time she covers Mafia Town in lava, would have been nice. And here is a very misfortunate coincidence that the developers most likely did not foresee. After collecting 25 hourglasses, Mustache Girl appears in your spaceship again and messes everything up, which leads you to Chapter 5, Time's End. From the spaceship you can see that the planet is all kinds of fucked up, and it feels like the time to confront her at last has come. Too bad this happened right after I did the annual Bird Movie Award ceremony. For those that doesn't know, the final act of Chapter 2 tricks you into thinking that the boss was nothing but the award ceremony for the winning bird. When you're back at the hub, the music is all distorted, and you cannot leave the room. Then, the phone rings, and someone is telling you to go back to Dead Bird Studio to uncover the secrets of the ceremony. What an unfortunate timing for this to first happen instead. How is someone that goes in blind supposed to know the difference between these two events? And how are you supposed to care about them equally? It just becomes this cluster of storylines. So fuck you, you stupid, red-wearing, mustache-having, cringe-worth acting, mafia-harassing girl-chan! No wonder everyone hates your guts! In any case, I feel like it was a bad idea to unlock the final chapter this early. Well, I guess 25 out of 40 hourglasses isn't that early, but you get the idea. Here is another odd design choice. Hats are unlocked by collecting yarn. There is a yarn type for every hat, but they all work as the same currency. The difference is that you can't create a hat before you have found at least one of its respective yarn type, which is a bit silly. From the beginning, if you're not feeling adventurous and instead go straight for the objective, the first yarn will be gained by talking to Mustache Girl after beating Act 2. So by either your second or third act, you will have sprint yarn, and after collecting 2, the sprint hat. So why the hell is there sprint yarns everywhere? I mean, Mafia Town is one thing, but in both Battle of the Birds and Subcon Forest? The same can be said for them all. It just seems like the yarn type is at complete random. The only rhyme or reason is what chapter they first show up. And fine, unless you are looking out for them or know their locations, you probably won't be able to unlock them all too early. But I can still remember feeling like the cost was way too low. So I think they should have gone for a somewhat different approach. Some examples being, keep yarn as a consistent currency, but change the way new hats unlock. Maybe there is a hat blueprint shop or something, or another NPC like the badge seller. On the other side, you could keep the different yarn types, but count them as unique currencies. This way, you have to find specifically brewing yarn to create the brewing hat. Actually, that idea sucks. Let's go with the former. I didn't write that in the script. I just realized it now. It's terrible. That's the worst fucking idea. What the fuck? There's also a problem with collectible priority. Like I mentioned, I ended up finding sprint yarn in Subcon, the third chapter. At that point, you will undoubtedly have acquired all hats except for the Time Stopper. So it just feels underwhelming. And why treat them as such secrets? One of them is behind a boss you probably won't even check. And it's encased in ice, having to be blown up. It's not hard to find and it's easy to break the ice, but why all that just for a sprint yarn? It just feels like there's no difference in the importance of the collectibles. Like there is no case of rarity. Any place you look or any challenge could lead to any yarn type, rift token or relic. This is another case of missed opportunities. But it isn't as awful as the badges. There are 11 badges. One of them is required to complete the game. The hookshot badge. Why is this a badge? It's literally a core item. As I said, this is the only one that you can't proceed without. It's even required to play the 4th chapter. It just feels ridiculous having this essential move take up a badge space, since you can only equip 3 at a time. I don't see how this couldn't just be an upgrade for your umbrella, which there are none of, by the way. Another badge is the camera. Again, why? You don't need it for anything. But is there any reason it should take up a badge space? And not just be a frickin' camera? There are supposed to be passive effects, but activating the camera requires a key input you're not using for anything else! God! The projectile badge sucks! the Mumble badge is expensive and is only for fun, and the one-hit hero badge is for self-imposed challenges. So if you scratch all these, there's actually only 6 useful badges, and that's me being very generous. This is without a single doubt the most disappointing aspect of the game. Actually, there is one more. My final issue, which is the most common criticism for sure, is the length. Calling the game short is unfair, but it's just begging for more content. Before I had collected my 25th hourglass and revealed the final act, I believed we were just getting started. And even when it did show up, I at least expected an entire chapter instead of just one stage with a boss. Seeing that ending was one of the most bittersweet experiences I've had in my life. And going for the full completion mark didn't take much longer either. Leaving the player wanting more is both a good and a bad thing. It's good because it clearly means that you enjoyed it, but at the same time, an ending should give you a sense of closure and feel like you are satisfied with what you got and are ready to move on. But I'm not, goddammit! There is so much untapped potential, and I can't wait for more. DLCs or a sequel, I don't care. I just want to be Hat Kid and explore the universe. You served me gears for breakfast, now I want a whole clock tower for dinner. Get on it, ya frickin' bastards!
Love you.